Welcome to the Last Polymath podcast channel. We're going to be analyzing a debate slash discussion between this guy over here from Theory of Everything, as well with Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, right? Where the philosophy is dead. And I agree with the formalities or the finalities of Neil deGrasse's argument, but I don't agree with his process. I think his logic isn't quite as direct, but he is correct. Philosophy is dead. There's no point in me to wait that until the end of the video, and let's go ahead and analyze the debate, and we'll see how and why.
Listen, the dome is characterized by a certain curve, which needs to be defined specifically. Then it's at rest at the top of the dome, but at any t that's non-negative, any time that's greater than 0, it can take off.
Why is what you're describing to me asymmetric at all?
So the point is that you just set up the system like that as a thought experiment in order to just put t equals minus t.
Okay.
It's just useful to set up the experiment like that.
Okay. So in that, so fine. It's interesting thought experiment. Nobody doesn't like thought experiments. Then of what utility is that to the practicing scientist, even if it is of high interest to the philosopher?
It then makes you say, hey, if there's a classical system that is determined, that's not the case.
So we shouldn't say, if that's really true about the Norton dome, then we shouldn't say classical physics is deterministic, right?
Correct.
Okay. What does that change? I don't get it. It's fine. It's great.
Yes, I actually agree with Neil deGrasse Tyson here, right? The guy I'm not too sure if that's his name, right? But the guy from Theory of Everything, he's trying to make a trivial argument here, right? Yeah, sure, right? Physics, whether it's classical physics, quantum physics, or large globular, physics from Einsteinian sort of terms, looking at the space time and all that stuff. It doesn't matter what branch of physics you're looking at, right? The reality here is simple. You are the one who created the narrative. Yes, and it's a narrative that physics has to be, deterministic. You don't need philosophy to tell you that it isn't. It's simply a thinking framework, and I think that's what people get lost at, right? Philosophy means formal philosophy, the stuff you write down, you start contemplating your ideas, and then you start building models using linguistics, right? Using language. Most of the philosophy is in human language, right? And by human language, I mean spoken language. I don't mean math. There's no way you're going to compare something that's written in math, which is, theoretical physics, chemistry has parts of math, etc., and some English or whatever written spoken language. You're not going to compare those sciences with something that's written in the terms that we're speaking about. There's less levels of accuracy. So yes, philosophy is dead. It's no longer relevant. Philosophy was relevant when it helped establish the scientific method, right? Because you're now thinking of logic, right? It was relevant when we were formalizing rules of logic, right? The boundary limits of logic. What does it mean, right? If this, then that. Are there different types of logic? Is there fuzzy logic? But when you're looking at the actual system right now, we don't need any of that because it's already been written down. People already integrated it. A lot of so-called scientists, right, especially at the edge of science, and I'm not including engineers as a separate issue, they already have integrated a philosophical thinking framework in their ideas. So yes, I agree with Neil deGrasse Tyson. Philosophy is dead. It's no longer relevant, right? If it's just ideation, thinking, or being critical, yet having a foundational formulations in how to reason correctly and having an intuitive mind that can allow that process to occur with very little let's say very little backdrop, then fair enough. But no, philosophy is dead. I agree with Neil deGrasse Tyson here.
Great result. Okay.
So let's think about this in a couple ways. So number one, what is physics? Like, physics is understanding what reality is. So we have to put an asterisk on what reality is, because who the heck knows what reality is? But physicists are trying to understand what that is. Someone like Tim Maudlin would say, hey, which I agree with, and I never put in these words before, quantum theory is never talked about in university as a physicist. You'd learn quantum mechanics and quantum field theory, but he would say, a theory tells you what the heck you're dealing with. It talks about ontology. So there needs to be that component as well.
What does it need to be if what we're doing still works? It needs to be to you, the philosopher. But to me, the practicing scientist, that's building circuit boards based on a complete understanding.
Yeah, he's correct here. Again, Neil deGrasse Tyson is correct here, right? You don't need to have some, and by theory here, they're not talking about scientific theory, which is distinguished from just a theory about things. There's different formalizations, right? Scientific theory is more about formalizing a logic with empirical evidence on the functionings of some phenomenon that's been observed. For example, you can have the theory of evolution, right? They have enough data, right? That's what the argument is, where they've seen the relationships between the genetics, the physiologies, etc., anthropological evidence until they've formulated a theory. They claim it's a theory, right? That's a claim scientific theory. Theory in other relationships means, ideas of things or hypotheses, right? So he's saying, the other guy, right, not Neil, he's saying, well, you do need to have some kind of overarching theory, or in linguistic terms, right? Because there's this idea that nobody, or rather very few people, understand quantum theory or quantum mechanics because it's not that intuitive, right? It has certain contradictory aspects, right? In Newtonian physics, you throw a ball, depending on the wind resistance, depending on the other factors, gravitational pull, the height, the mass of the ball, you can predict its trajectory, right? Because that's classical physics, right? The intuition is very inbuilt in humans and other animals, right? Dogs, cats, horses, they all understand Newtonian physics. The difference here is, people state that quantum theory is far more complex, right? It's not straightforward. It's not something that you can just wake up doing, and that's why they say it's not intuitive. For me, I think quantum theory is intuitive once you understand the rules of engagement and the game that you're playing. But yes, it's not inbuilt, perhaps, into all animals like Newtonian physics is.
Of how quantum physics works, I don't need to know that. That doesn't mean I don't want to know it, but the search for that answer, if it distracts me from other progress I will make in this physical universe, and I'm a practicing scientist, that's how I'm going to choose my paths in that way. So, yeah, quantum physics, who was it that said the day you understand quantum physics is the day you can be certain you don't? Because it's not,
There are variations on that.
Our native senses to interpret. And
Yeah.
okay.
So if that's one view, you can just take the view that, hey, whatever is useful, let me just build something with it.
And that's how I think of physics. That's how I think of physics.
Yeah, so generally, I don't really agree with most of Neil deGrasse's arguments, but in this case, I do agree with it, right? What separates science from other things, right, philosophies and everything else, is the fact that there is a propensity, right? It's inbuilt in scientific method for you to actually have evidence, right? Empirical evidence by studying nature across time and instances, and then creating the mechanics around that, right? Things that can be removed, and then you create a model, right? The things that you can use to predict future behaviors. That's what science is by definition. Meanwhile, if you look at more philosophical reasoning, it's more about the potentiality, the ideas, what ifs, and just going through different depths of analysis. But there isn't very strong formal there is formal philosophy, right? There isn't a strong mathematical background in most philosophies, right? So that's the main difference there. So Neil is right? Science is about figuring out the truth. This is why people have spent hundreds of millions of dollars researching fields in theoretical physics like string theory, which is not a theory, it's just a mathematical abstractions, right? Again, it's not really science because all the stuff that it predicts, right? They don't all go along with empirical evidence. Now, perhaps you could say that we don't know enough about nature in order to test those things in a truer sense. Fair enough. But in general, string theory doesn't hold to reality as we can test it right now. Hence, it's not even a theory. It's a hypothesis. It's more likened to mathematics than really physics, right? So yeah, 100%. I agree with Neil deGrasse Tyson here. Science is about figuring out the truth as we can measure things. Yes, you have philosophical ideas, high-ranking scientists. And by ranking, I mean, people that write good papers and are on the top of their fields. They do understand philosophy, right? That's why they're able to ask the right questions. But Philosophy is, you don't need a philosopher to work with a scientist in order to come up with something amazing. That doesn't work that way. Science is about getting results, testing hypotheses, and those hypotheses, if you already have a philosophical reasoning capacity, then you don't need so-called philosophy, right? Formalisms and understand, reading about Nietzsche and Kant, right? And all those things. It's not relevant, right? Again, we're assuming certain things here, right? We're assuming that you already have the basics.
Yeah.
Physics is matter, motion, and energy, and every way that allows me to predict the future of those systems so that I can exploit it to the benefit of civilization and intellectual pursuit. That's how I think of physics.
Okay, so there's a couple of points there. Number one, there's a value in there, which isn't derivable from the physical facts.
What do you mean a value?
Yeah, so now here the theory of everything guy is correct, right? Neil deGrasse Tyson added a value proposition there, right? He mentioned that, for him, physics is, adding benefit to society, or rather civilization. That is not relevant in physics, right? Physics is about the facts of the nature of reality that you can use to predict other things related to it, right? He's adding his own little, feeling in there. And we mentioned earlier, right? He believes in civilization and bettering it. That's nothing to do with physics, though, right? That's an additional statement. So yeah, theory of everything guy is correct on that one. Good, notice.
What do you mean? But just I like it.
Because you want to do something that's good. You want to do something useful. So you're not just doing anything.
No, I didn't say useful. Did I say useful? Let me give a different word. Let me be more precise.
Sure.
And less precise at the same time. I'd like to know ever more about how the universe works so that I can invoke it in the progress of civilization. And by progress, I mean new understandings, the history of this exercise.
Yeah, he's saying the same stuff. I think Neil deGrasse Tyson didn't really capture the element there, right? Which is that he's just repeating the same thing, right? He's making a judgment qualification over there based on the betterment of civilization, right? That's the value addition there, right?
Often, hardly ever doesn't convert to new inventions, new means of living, to prolong our benefits to our health, our longevity, and just our enlightenment about how the universe works. So that's how I think of physics, and at the most fundamental level, with chemistry layered on that, and then biology layered on top of that.
I think that's an unfair characterization of how physics developed and even develops to this day. Now, as for modern examples, okay, let's put that aside.
But what makes it unfair? What makes it unfair?
Well, Einstein thought plenty about Mach's principle, and Einstein also thought about other philosophical positions.
Oh, by the way, Mach's principle was a philosopher from the 19th century. That's pre the era that I'm describing here, in terms of the value and influence of philosophers in the thinking of a modern physicist who's making actual discoveries. So you can mention Mach, and I'll give you Mach, but there's not much after Mach that you can cite. Yeah, but go on. Mm-hmm.
John Bell.
Yeah, see, here's the thing, right? Like, yeah, Neil deGrasse Tyson is correct here, right? Philosophy is dead. There's literally nothing after Nietzsche, and even then, Nietzsche was just consolidating things. There's really nothing else that's been said that's uniquely interesting to anything, especially the branch of physics, right? The last maybe great, contemporary philosopher that wrote anything about, let's say, postmodernism, is people like not Descartes, Foucault, etc. Right? These people are not really adding anything. They're just, using philosophical reasoning to analyze new challenges in society. But in terms of actually adding value, reasoning capacities, right? Reasoning, conceptual aspects that are making society, making physics better in any meaningful way, right? That doesn't exist, right? That's the reality. I think this is a moot point. Neil deGrasse Tyson 100% correct on his conclusion here. Philosophy is dead, the same way God died, right?
Of the Bell's theorems that we just mentioned, or the Bell's inequalities of the Nobel Prize, he was influenced.
Yeah, but with John Bell, question to you. Was he trained as a philosopher or as a physicist? That's kind of my point here. I think he was trained as a physicist. And so, and not to be pedantic about it, but it's the value of learning how the physical universe works with laboratories, okay, relative to armchairs. That's really what I'm getting at here. But sure, it's great. The Bell's inequality theorem, very important, very thought-provoking, as any good philosophical conclusion should be.
Yeah. So I think we're speaking past one another. So let me be precise, because I don't want to get misconstrued. What I'm saying is that physics benefits from an understanding of philosophy. And also,
It did, especially
physical statements by a physicist.
Yeah, so let's go here and see what if the argument here is stronger from Neil's side or from the other side, right? So the Nobel Prize for Bell's inequality, right? It doesn't matter about who actually was the person that created. So we know John Stuart Bell developed the mathematical inequality, right? That was named after him, right? Do you think he was a trained philosopher, or he was actually a physicist, right? It's the physics part that matters, not the philosophy part, right? A philosopher can't, or at this day, win any Nobel Prizes in physics because he won't understand, or she won't understand anything that they're talking about. You need someone trained in math or some kind of theoretical physics, right? John Stuart Bell over there. I'm going to share my screen. So at least we are speaking about facts over here. There's no need for us to create, argumentations made on false premises. Otherwise, we're failing at the scientific method over here. Let's use a great source, Wikipedia, over here. Now, Wikipedia tells us John Stuart Bell, he was born there, was a physicist. Notice, not some dusty philosopher. It's a physicist, right, from Northern Ireland, an originator of Bell's theorem, an important theoretical theorem in quantum physics, right? So I would like more of these podcasts to actually prove their statements and points, so that people aren't just talking past each other, right? As you can see over there, University of Birmingham, PhD in physics, right? Doesn't have a PhD, or rather, a PhD in philosophy is not what made him go this far. So this is insane, right? Bringing up Bell was kind of crazy, right? It's irrelevant, right? The physics component is irrelevant to anything that was being discussed there.
Embedded in them philosophical assumptions. So
Yes,
if
they
we
do.
say something about material, there's like materialism is in there. What is that? What is a material? Can we define it specifically? Musings, like actually sitting and thinking about what the heck exists. What is the nature of this? What is space-time? You mentioned that this is something we don't talk about much. Actually, there's several people who think that space-time is something that's